with Exponent Philanthropy and Youth Philanthropy Connect. Exponent Philanthropy is the country's largest association of funders, nearly 2,200 members strong, and the only one dedicated to serving foundations with few or no staff, philanthropic families, and individual donors. Our vibrant network has in common lean operations and the style of philanthropy motivated by personal passion, community needs, and the strong desire for better outcomes. We provide high-quality and cost-effective programs, resources, and connections that maximize our members' dollars and time for the benefit of diverse communities and causes. I'm Makila Massey, Program Director here at Exponent Philanthropy. Exponent Philanthropy has been working with Youth Philanthropy Connect to plan this 4-part webinar series where participants will learn from nationally known and renowned field experts about strategies to work with and lift up youth. First, some housekeeping. I'm here in the Exponent Philanthropy DC office with my colleague Christina Nygaard, and we will both be helping out with your questions today. We're recording this webinar and it will be made available to you after the program. Before we begin, a quick review of the GoToWebinar technology. There are 2 parts to what you see on your screen. The viewer window is where you see these slides. You can resize the window by clicking and dragging the lower right corner or the zoom button. There's also the control panel and this rectangular box along the side of your screen. The Grab tab lets you minimize the window so that you can more fully see the slides we'll be showing today. And you can submit questions or comments during the webinar in the questions pane. This topic always generates many specific questions, and we'll get to as many as possible today, but if we don't get to yours, we will respond after the program. And now I'm turning it over to our speakers so that they can tell us more about themselves.
Excellent. Thanks, Akila. And welcome, everyone. My name is Dan Horgan. I am going to be your lead facilitator for today's session, and I've got 3 amazing youth leaders that are also joining me as co-facilitators that are going to introduce themselves in a minute. I wanted to just start by giving you a little bit of background on who I am and why I am so passionate about the topic that we're going to cover in today's webinar. So just a little bit about me. So I started my career in service and philanthropy back when I was 18. I was the founder of the first youth-led Community of Promise with America's Promise in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, meaning that most of our staff were high school and college students running in-school, out-of-school, and summer-based programs for students in underserved communities throughout the greater Pittsburgh region. I spent about 12 plus years in nonprofit management roles before I transitioned and worked for Capital One, managing their corporate giving and their employee engagement programs for about 5 years. And then more recently launched my own training and consulting practice that really focuses in on leadership and organizational development, with a whole gamut of different types of projects, things ranging from developing a company-wide mentoring program in partnership with Deloitte to launching the very first New York City Youth Council, where youth are serving alongside the elected city council members here in the city across all 5 boroughs, and then also developing a youth leadership and service learning camp in partnership with Intel out in California. So throughout my whole career and my whole life, practically, I've been engaged in service and philanthropy, and I'm super excited to be able to co-lead this project with all of you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gabby, who's going to introduce herself and share a little bit about Youth Philanthropy Connect.
Hi, my name is Gabby Baum. I am a junior at the Academy of Information Technology Engineering. I have many developments in philanthropy in the past. I've worked with the Jewish Teen Funders Network, NJY Camps Philanthropy Board, along with Teen Tzedakah Corps, and I'm currently creating my own youth leadership and philanthropy board. On to YPC, it is Youth Philanthropy Connect, and it is a youth-driven network that connects youth grant makers and adults to support them to each other. The resources and learning also go along with the movement of youth engagement in philanthropy. Their whole idea is to come and work together and involve teens with this very important process. I'd like to introduce the other members, which are Lexi and Allison, who are also part of Youth Philanthropy Connect.
My name is Lexi Laginus, and I am a senior at Bedford Senior High School. I'm involved in Bedford's Community Foundation and then other organizations within my school, and I'm on the YPC leadership team. And I'm going to turn it over to Allie.
Hi, I'm Ali Pakraduni, and I am a sophomore at Temple University. I'm a kinesiology major, and I started working with my family philanthropy at the Surdna Foundation, which led me to YPC and the leadership team. I also sit as the philanthropy chair for my sorority, and happy to be here. And back to Dan to continue this.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So just so everybody, we're going to turn the webcams off as we go through the majority of the webinar. We'll turn the webcams back on towards the end of the session so that when we have Q&A, you'll be able to see us in our responses. So with that, I'm going to get us started here in terms of how we've organized today's webinar. Just a couple additional housekeeping issues in addition to what Akila mentioned. One is everyone who's on today's webinar should have received this morning an email that included not only the slides but also a worksheet. That worksheet is designed for you to sort of follow along as we go from slide to slide and cover the various topics that we have prepared for you today. It's also an opportunity for you to really be able to document and fill in the different elements of that worksheet and use that moving forward in terms of a tool when thinking about how to build, manage, and sustain effective youth-adult partnerships. We've organized today's webinar essentially into 3 different buckets which build off of each other. The first section we're going to cover is all around how do we establish the mindset to work effectively in youth-adult partnerships. And again, this is going to focus on how we establish the attitude, which really not only builds effective youth-adult partnerships, but also manages them and sustains them for the long term. We transition from the mindset to action. So how do we actionalize that work or that attitude around bringing youth and adults to the same table and creating a culture and an experience that is beneficial for both, as well as leveraging each other's skills, experiences, and talents. And then we're going to talk towards the end of the day's webinar about the results. So how do we effectively evaluate the impact of these youth-adult partnerships on the individuals engaged, as well as the broader community based on the projects and the work that is being advanced. We're really going to take a focus around an applied learning approach here, and so today's webinar is packed full of tangible tools that you can hopefully leverage in the work that you do in your community. It's also packed full of new perspectives or ways of thinking about this work, and then also activities that you can put in your toolbox and be able to pull out when you're working in those youth-adult partnerships within your organizations or back in your communities as well. We'll jump right into our first section, which is again all around mindset. And the way we wanted to start off is by just reminding ourselves, regardless of our age, the fact is that all of us really want to belong to communities, and we want to be understood and feel valued. That's something that we share regardless, again, of whether we're an adult or a young person. And so it's understanding first and foremost the sense of empathy that is required to build effective youth-adult partnerships. So challenging ourselves to put ourselves in the shoes of someone else. So if we're a young person, how do we put ourselves in the shoes of an adult? And if we're an adult, how do we rewind in time, if you will, and put ourselves in the shoes of a young person so that we can start to foster the type of relationship that's going to be long-term versus short-term and more transactional. And so the first slide here you'll see is called Back to the Future. This is an exercise I use often in youth development and youth-adult partnership workshops. And what we ask the youth and adults present to do is, on the youth side, we challenge them to fast forward in time and put themselves in the shoes of their 40-year-old self and really think about what are those key reminders that they want to make sure their 40-year-old self remembers when thinking about and engaging youth in the work that they're doing. On the other side of it, we want adults to rewind in time and put themselves in the shoes of their 16-year-old self and really think about what was the advice that you wish you would have had earlier on in the process. So based on all of your experiences and the life lessons that you've gathered from the time you were 16 till now, what were the key pieces of advice that you wish you would have had? And so with that, I'm going to ask actually Ali, Lexi, and Gabby to share with us just one reminder that they want to make sure their 40-year-old self knows. So I'm going to turn it over to Ali first to share hers.
Hi again. My letter to my 40-year-old self reflects on hopefully still working in the line of philanthropy and to not forget about being open and understanding to all opinions, no matter age or background, because though it may be easier to handle things alone and more down the line, like your usual, it's more beneficial to open it up to different voices and opinions, and in the long run will be better for the future.
Awesome. So we'll flip over to Lexi. Lexi, I think you're still muted.
Okay, good.
Yep, you're good.
So my letter to myself would be to encourage ambition within youth. Within my personal experiences, I want to go into the nonprofit field for my career, and so I think a lot of times I get somewhat discouraged from some adults that don't necessarily understand what a job in philanthropy looks like. So I would say, like, thinking, 30 years down the line, the job market is probably going to look a lot different than it is now. And I would just say that I would tell my future self to keep an open mind when talking to youth about their futures, because I want them to have, like, the ambition and the drive to, like, go after what they want to do. So, yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Lexi. And then we're going to turn it over to Gabby.
So what I would tell my 40-year-old self is that you were once in the footsteps of a 16 or 17-year-old, and that you need to put some faith in the younger generation, because one day they will be you, and it'll continue on. And putting your faith and trusting them and giving them work is what got you to where you are today.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby. So you can, essentially how this exercise would roll out in a meeting or in a community setting, where you again invite the youth and the adults that are a part of the organization or part of the team to really be able to think about those reminders, as well as the advice that they wish they would have had earlier on in the process. So again, this is an activity. It's also an excellent way to kickstart the conversation in your organizations about how to bring youth and adults effectively together for the first time, and really underscoring the fact that that sense of empathy is really key. It's almost the foundational element to being able to build an effective relationship between youth and adults. So we're going to flip to the next slide, which builds upon that. So every time that you put yourself in the shoes of someone else, right, we have to caution ourselves to not jump to conclusions or not make assumptions about what we think that young people or we think that adults may be thinking or may be processing. And so what you see on the slide here is what's called the ladder of inference. This is a tool that, again, I've used in a lot of different trainings. It was developed by a Harvard professor to really challenge and help us understand the way that we process or view the world around us. It helps us to think about, when we look at the world around us, how we interpret all of those things that are in our environment, and how those interpretations and assumptions that we make influence the actions at the end of the day that we take. And so when I was first introduced to the ladder of inference, it actually reminded me a lot of the classic book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey. And in the book, he talks about seeking first to understand before being understood. And so the idea he used is supported by a story that he shared, where he got on the subway in New York City, and at a couple stops down the path, there was a father and a few kids that got on the subway. And after some time, the kids started to really get rambunctious and were sort of playing around on the subway, and they started to bother people by knocking into them, pulling people's newspapers. And Stephen recalls that he really started to get really frustrated with the fact that the father was just sort of sitting there in a daze, not really paying attention to his kids, not correcting them, not trying to resolve the situation that was unfolding. And finally, after a certain period of time passed, Stephen finally mentioned to the father, your kids are really bothering the people around you. And it was at that moment that the father looked up out of his daze and shared with Stephen that he apologized and he would work to get them under control, but they had just come from burying their mother. And you can just imagine, reading that story or hearing that story, it sort of is all of a sudden the context of the situation comes into a greater sense of clarity. And you start to understand now why the kids may have been acting the way they were, why the father was in that daze. And all of a sudden, Stephen Covey just, immediately switched, like you would a light switch, his perception and his actions in that moment. So he immediately apologized and offered to support the man and support, the kids in that particular situation. But that story reminds me of this ladder of inference, because if you look at the very bottom, it reminds us that at the bottom of the way we process information is we just open our eyes and observe the world around us. It's where we look at the data. It's where we look at the experiences, the facts of the world around us, right? What happens in our brain as we process that, though, is we start to interpret as we move up the ladder all of those experiences and all of those observations, the data that we're bringing in, and we start to select the data that we want to hone in on more. In the process of interpreting how we filter it, we start to have some emotional reactions. That's where the assumptions come into play. It's where we start to draw conclusions, and then we start to adjust our beliefs, which ultimately impact the actions that we take. And there's this sort of reflexive loop that's illustrated on the slide that talks about when we adapt our beliefs based on the conclusions that we've drawn, that impacts over and over again how we filter the data all the way at the bottom of the ladder. So what does this have to do with youth-adult partnerships? Well, it has a lot to do with how we build relationships. And as we think about putting ourselves in the shoes of someone else, it challenges us to think about the real-life examples of how things might play out. So for example, a young person may come to a meeting and sit there quietly without at all engaging in the conversation, right? And so we may think that that young person is disengaged. So as we move up the ladder, we start to draw conclusions. The young person doesn't want to be there. The young person is being forced to be there. Young person doesn't really value the opportunity that they've been given. And therefore, it may impact the way that we act, the way that we draw conclusions or beliefs around that young person's engagement. If we would have stayed low on the ladder and sought to understand the facts at the bottom rung, we would have asked that young person at a break, hey, I noticed that you haven't really been actively contributing to the conversation. I know you have a lot of great information, a lot of great experience that this group could benefit from. And so I would love to find out from you, like, is there something that we can do to help you feel more comfortable or to help you to engage more in the discussion? And at that point, the young person might open up and say, I'm just not comfortable talking in large groups. I'd be more comfortable in smaller groups. And right there, it can shape then the actions of the event organizers or the meeting organizers to say, maybe throughout the course of our conversations together, we can start in small groups, give people the opportunity to really think about things and pair up and share their ideas with one another, with a partner, and then reflect on it in a larger group setting. So everybody has a clear opportunity to be able to contribute, and we stay low on the ladder in terms of understanding where each person is coming from, so their voices are really valued in the course of the conversation. So again, that's just a practical example of how the ladder of inference can work, but it's a great reminder for us when building youth-adult partnerships to not jump to conclusions in terms of what young people and adults may or may not be thinking at any given point in the exchange. So we're going to shift to the next slide, which moves us from, again, the sense of empathy to the sense of not jumping to conclusions to, from a mindset standpoint, I'm always one who typically asks in groups, how do we define success? At the end of the day, if we want to build effective youth-adult partnerships, what does success look like in terms of that partnership? In the work that I've been doing in youth-adult partnership training and youth development, I've used the Michigan State University's Youth-Adult Partnership Rubric, which is essentially divided into 4 different quadrants with a whole set of criteria or guidelines, if you will, in each of the 4 spaces. So the first is about authentic decision making. This is the one that really challenges us from if you use this tool essentially as a roadmap to help you guide the process of building and managing effective youth-adult partnerships. Authentic decision making is all about two-way communications. It's recognizing that the youth voices in the room are equal to those that are in the adult voices and need to be equally shared in the process. Young people's perspectives, their experiences, the skill sets that they bring should be a part of the community in the same way that the adults' experiences and the adults' points of view are as well. Youth also participate in authentic decision making, meaning that it's not about an adult serving as an authority figure who makes the final decision at the end of the day, but it's about youth and adults sharing in that decision making and being committed to building consensus as they work from the point of learning about a particular issue to deciding on the action that's necessary to move it forward. Now you can imagine in the process of advancing authentic decision making, the second quadrant comes into play, which is all about adults serving as natural mentors. What this means is, as adults, how do we help young people to expand their network of ideas and their network of social capital or the relationships that they have within their community. And so in the process of working with young people, adults have an obligation to create a space that number one, has appropriate boundaries, that helps to provide the right framework for us to operate and work within, but at the same time creates an atmosphere where adults are playing an active listening role. So again, they're pausing and taking the time to, with an open mind and with great intention, listen to what young people are reflecting on and what ideas that they have regarding the topic that's at hand. From there, they move into really thinking about the goals and the possibilities with those young people and helping as an adult in the room to celebrate all of the accomplishments that the whole group, including the youth, are making from the time they came together in the first place to the time that they're starting to implement their projects or programs out in the community. The third quadrant on the next slide is all about reciprocity. This is all about understanding that youth and adults both have something to teach and have something to learn from each other. So it's this whole concept of giving and taking. You know, being able to give and add value to the course of the conversation and to those that are in the group, but also to be able to step back and acknowledge what you don't know and to take that information from others, to take advantage of the opportunities to experience new things, to explore different points of view that aren't your own, and really challenge yourself to think about things in a different way, which leads you then to the community connectedness, which is all about, at the end of the day, how do we establish ourselves as active contributors to our community, meaning the group that we're in, and then to the broader community, almost like a rippling effect. It also is about how do we continue to build and establish that social capital that we talked about in terms of program involvement, so expanding people's network of ideas and expanding people's network of people, the contacts that they have within the community. The next couple of slides, I wanted to, so I'm someone who I love the literature reviews and always sort of diving into what research is out there around you know, business topics or organizational development topics and how that specifically relates to the youth development sphere and specifically to youth adult partnerships. And so this first book that I'm recommending, Daniel Pink, Drive, is all about what motivates us. And a big part of our mindset when building, managing, and sustaining youth adult partnerships is how do we continue to motivate each other on both sides of the spectrum? So how do youth motivate adults and how do adults motivate young people in the course of working together? And what Daniel Pink in his research identifies is that there's basically three core things that are at the root of what motivates anyone. And that is, number one, the sense of autonomy, the desire to direct our own lives, the sense of control. So if you think about it, youth and adults both want to be able to control something, right? They want to feel like they have real authority, real leadership, real opportunities to evoke some control, some power in the process of making decisions in a joint way, to advancing a particular solution to a project or to a community issue, which lends itself to the second, which is all about mastery. It's this idea that we all want to be really, really good at something and be able to feel valued in the group, that we have some unique contribution. Youth and adults, when we're building these relationships, we need to take a step back and dig below the surface to understand the unique skills, the unique contributions that we all have, and really be intentional about how we are leveraging those unique contributions and calling them out in a very specific way. The third is all around the idea of purpose. So beyond the idea of wanting to control and have autonomy and the idea of mastering something and having that unique value contribution, it's also the idea of staying true to the big picture, the vision at the end of the day, that is larger than any one person, but it's really about the synergy of the group, what the group can collectively achieve. The second book that I would recommend in this topic is called Shine, and it's by Dr. Edward Hallowell. And what I love about this book is it really is talking about how do we drive engagement in any relationship, any group setting that we find ourselves in. And so from a youth-adult partnership perspective, if you work from the bottom of the pyramid up, first and foremost, in terms of selecting the right people, this is all about how do we get people into the right seats to light up their brains, to get them excited, to fuel their passion, right? This requires us to dig below the surface and understand what people's individual strengths and where their growth opportunities, what are their specific goals, the skills that they want to grow, the opportunities or the experiences that they want to take advantage of. From there, we think about how do we connect? How do we create the sense of team building that's necessary for youth and adults to come together, to recognize those individual strengths, and to begin to identify ways that they can leverage them for the good of the group. In the process of team building, in the creation of those relationships, that foundation of the partnership, we also have to create a space for play. This opportunity to not get stuck in the way that things have always been done, or not get stuck in our own individual perspectives, but through play, through the idea of infusing creativity and innovation, how do we drive these partnerships between youth and adults to the point where we are driving collective energy to think of new solutions, to build upon solutions that have gotten us to where we are today. Recognizing along the way that when we do that, there's going to be a certain level of conflict, a certain number of challenges and obstacles that will surface along the way. The idea of grappling and growing is super important for the youth-adult partnership space, and recognizing that in our journey, we need to create a safe space for youth and adults to really work through their problems and to challenge each other, to really call out and hold each other accountable when we, heels in the ground, get stuck in our point of view and aren't open to hearing or seeing what someone else is thinking. We have to challenge each other in those moments and hold each other accountable to thinking about the good of the group and where we are going in terms of the ultimate question, the why, the purpose for why we're coming together in the first place. When we do that effectively, we move to the final stage, which is shining. We've used the right rewards in terms of our relationship building, how we build each other's credibility, build each other's experience bank, and really reward each other for the contributions, the unique contributions that we're providing. That's when we get to that level of achievement, which is where the whole group shines, and individually, you can step back and see the value that you added to the partnership and to the work that you've been advancing. The third and final book that I would recommend is a book called The Inspiration Factor from Terry Barber. And what I love is this quote that's on the screen from Terry Barber's book, which says, we need to notice, name, and nurture each other. And when we think about youth-adult partnerships, a lot of it in terms of the glue that holds those partnerships together is about how we continue to inspire each other and strengthen our individual and collective impact. This plays out in a very tangible way in the way that adults notice the contributions of youth, they name it, and they continue to nurture it so young people continue to grow in that space. The same is true of how youth notice, name, and nurture the adults that are part of the partnership. So for example, in my work with Allie might say, hey Dan, I noticed that you actively engaged us in the decision making around certain elements of our meeting today. And I just wanted to call out that that was a really great way of engaging us, and we really felt like our voices mattered in the process of moving today's agenda forward. That example shows that she called out my actions, she put a specific name to it, and she nurtured it by saying it really worked for her, and it worked for the other young people that were at the table. Therefore, that nurturing is going to inspire me to continue to do that and look for more ways of including that in the work moving forward. Again, the same is true. You could reverse the roles and have the adults being able to call out those specific contributions of youth and be able to continue to nurture those as well. So again, these are just 3 book recommendations that you can take the key points of those 3 books and really apply it to the work of youth-adult partnership and getting ourselves into the right mindset of how we can not only build, but how do we sustain those partnerships long-term. So now we're going to move from mindset to action. So we've got the great attitude that youth-adult partnerships really matter, that they can, if done effectively, can really move forward the solutions that are going to be long-term and sustainable within our communities. And now it's about how do we bring that to action. What you see on the screen is a youth-adult continuum, or youth engagement continuum. This is something, an exercise I use a lot in training to help people understand that there are people that are totally, completely disengaged from their community, and the far end of the spectrum on the left, right? I call those the couch potatoes. They're just sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing, have never engaged in the community whatsoever. And on the complete flip side, you have the ideal engagement. So if you think about what your uber state of engagement in the community would look like, that's what that particular individual is doing in your community. Between those two, you have a whole gamut of stepping stones, of experiences that move you up from one end of the spectrum to the next, right? And so what we ultimately have to think about are, number one, there's a diverse set of ways in which we can take action in our community. And number two, it's super important that we meet people where they are and help them to take the appropriate stepping stones to move up the spectrum, to move up the continuum closer towards that ideal state of engagement in due time, right? So I just want to take a step back and play this out a little bit. And I'm going to start with Allie, who's going to share with you an example of maybe one of the very first service experiences that she had when she in the very beginning when she first started getting connected to community.
Hi. When I was first given the opportunity to give and just basically reach out to the community was when I was about 12 years old. My family organization reached out to me and gave me it was basically an idea. They just shared the idea of going out in your community and finding areas that you don't usually go to that are not very well off, and like just kind of seeing how you can help. And just from researching that, they gave me the opportunity to give my first grant, and just having it be somewhere close to me, somewhere that I could go see, it was a soup kitchen that I could go see flourish, was something that carried with me for the rest of my life and is the reason that I continued to help and work in the field of philanthropy.
That's awesome. So that's an example of, that very first experience that Allie just mentioned, going to the soup kitchen, experiencing something that she'd never experienced before, was really the catalyst for her to think about, okay, so now I've had this experience, I've been opened up to this particular issue, this particular resource or organization in my community, and then left her with the question of, okay, so what can I do now? What more can I do around this particular work? So next I wanted to ask Lexi if you could share with us an example of when you got others engaged in the work that you were doing in the community.
Okay, so I've been involved in a leadership conference called HOBE for about 3 years. It is a conference for high school sophomores to come in and learn a little bit how to be a leader through service learning. And I served on staff for this conference last year, and a big goal of staff is to get students engaged and really participate in the conference, not just be there but also be involved and want to learn more. So to do that, I shared part of my story and that I had been through the conference my sophomore year, and we have small groups, and within my small group they really took hold to that, and by sharing my own experiences, it opened them up to be open-minded about what they were going to learn throughout the conference. And actually, because of my service through that, I got students to be from participating to actually engaged, and then move up the ladder to be event volunteers. And I actually have 3 students coming back from last year that participated that are going to serve and volunteer. So that was just a little snip about how I got people engaged within that certain seminar.
That's awesome. So what Lexi just gave is a great example of how just listening to her story, she inspired young people that were there to step up and get engaged, and then beyond that engagement to continue to get engaged even further by volunteering and by getting even more involved in the HOBE workshops, which again is the movement up the ladder at a pace that's appropriate, sort of the stepping stones one at a time that moves you from the disengaged phase to the ideal engagement. So I wanted to ask Gabby. Gabby is in the process of creating her own youth philanthropy organization, and which is definitely on the ideal engagement side of the spectrum. And so Gabby, I'd love to have you share a little bit about that work that you're doing.
So I started creating my own youth philanthropy and leadership organization. I have called it SMILE, and it stands for So Much in Life to Enjoy. And my goal right now is to really have an organization that is youth-led and youth-developed. And I have been able to contact a bunch of people who have advancements and know what they're doing within the philanthropy field, and they have joined on the board. And from right now, I'm planning different programs and different events that we can do and put together. And I'm on the process right now of recruiting different members to come together, and we are going to create this board and hopefully make the community better.
That's awesome. So again, that's a great, fantastic example that Gabby just shared of on the far end of the spectrum under ideal, of being able to have all these different unique experiences that she's had the opportunity to take advantage of and take those and leverage those into the creation of her own organization. So really being that event organizer, organizational developer who gets more and more young people engaged and gives them the opportunity to step into leadership roles as well. You see at the bottom of this slide, the social media track. It's just another way of thinking about this work. So again, from a social media engagement standpoint, we think about the easiest thing that we can ask people to do is just like the content that we put out there, right? The second step up the ladder is really thinking about the comments. So not just like it, but comment on it. Share how it's connected to you personally. And then if you really, really like it, the third piece is share it with your network. Help us to amplify the message. Be an ambassador for what it is that we're working on. And the last is create your own unique individual content and put that out there so that others can continue to learn more about the work at hand. This youth engagement continuum is really an important step. Again, as a reminder that think about it from a donor perspective. Most donors don't come in at the super high end of the spectrum. So they'll come in and in the process of being cultivated, they'll make a contribution and seek to learn more about the work and the impact of that investment. If they are satisfied with that investment, if they feel like it's really benefited what they hope to benefit, they'll move up most likely, or they'll at least be retained where they are. And so this is just a good reminder when working with youth that meet young people and adults where they are along the continuum, and then almost create that specialized or customized plan of action so that the more they're engaged, the more likely they are to continue to take steps where they deepen their engagement and move closer to the ideal side of the spectrum. Our next slide in terms of action is focused on the developmental relationship framework. So this is from the Search Institute, which developed the 40 developmental assets. And this really is all about when young people and adults are working together, what are sort of 5 core ways that adults can be supportive and the role that adults play in the process of building that partnership and helping to really contribute to the positive youth development of the young leaders that are engaged. And so there's 5 things that are spotlighted here on this slide. And what I would love to do is, beyond just what the research tells us, I also want to highlight some very tangible ways that these things come to life. And so the first one on here is expressing care. So adults showing young people that they want what's best for them. And I'm going to ask Gabby if she could share with us an example of an adult that played in this capacity for her.
So when I was younger, I had someone who expressed a lot of care for me, and I was dealing with something and it was really hard and I wanted to do something. And I had one of my teachers at school come up to me and say, I'm here for you, and if you want to do something, let's do something. And she helped me organize an event, and she was there every single part of the way. And if we were doing something and she disagreed, she'd come up to me and she'd be caring and everything and say, maybe what if we do it this way? And she just showed her support and showed that she cared and guided me and helped me throughout the whole entire way.
That's great. This is a great example of just by showing care for a young person that engages them, it challenges them, it makes them think differently about whatever the vision is that they have at hand, and really pushes them, which leads to the second part, which is how do we challenge growth among young people that are at our table? So how do we insist that we continually put ourselves outside of our comfort zone where that growth can really take place in our development? And so I'm going to ask Ali. Ali, if you can share with us an example of an adult, how did they challenge your particular growth along your engagement?
Personally, when an adult, several, came into my life to basically, I'm focusing on a mixture between challenge growth and share power, because when I was first given the opportunity to come sit in on board meetings to make actual decisions, and they were listening to my opinion, it was just that invitation, that handout to listen to someone's opinion and feel that they care and they really do want your help, and then seeing not only after giving advice, seeing change being implemented. And this happened with our youth program. We started improving it. It was a boards training program, and they brought me in after I did it, and the changes are being implemented this year. And it has made me grow so much, just knowing that my opinion matters out there, and that just the slightest things can create change and start new processes and get different people involved. And just little invitations and questions, reaching out to youth really does empower them greatly.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ali. And I think what Ali highlighted is the fact that, as adults, we can listen to young people and then just move on, right? But if we listen to young people and really engage their voices in then moving to the action. So getting ideas and then translating those ideas into the specific action steps that we're going to take within our projects or programs is such an important link that needs to be in place for those partnerships to be effective. The next one is around providing support. So really the role that adults play in helping young people complete the tasks, help them to achieve their goals. I'm going to ask Lexi if you could just share an example of an adult, how they tangibly help provide support for you.
So my sophomore year, I attended a grant makers conference, and I connected with a facilitator there. She's been in the nonprofit field for several years, and she got me involved with shadowing someone at a community foundation different from my own, and also connected me to YPC's leadership team. For me, providing support came from giving me the opportunities to grow and showing me the different ways that I could get involved within nonprofit work and showing me that they wanted me to achieve my career goals as well.
That's awesome. So, and then the last one is just around expanding possibilities, which builds off of what Lexi just shared. So helping Lexi, that facilitator help open Lexi's eyes to different career paths, different opportunities to help her achieve the goals that she wants to achieve within the community impacts in youth philanthropy space. The same is true in terms of adults who step up and help young people expand their possibilities. So you may come to the table as a young person with one point of view, but adults are there to help challenge, to help expand your horizons, and to help connect you to new opportunities to really think differently about the world around you. And so Gabby, could you give us an example of how an adult has done that for you?
So I was very fortunate that JTFN gave me the opportunity to go to a conference in New York. And this happened to be the Youth Philanthropy Connect conference in New York. And from there, my eyes were opened to this whole other culture and people from all over the tri-state area and all over who really, want to use philanthropy. And from then, this possibility opened my eyes to Youth Philanthropy Connect, which I joined the team, and now I'm here talking on a webinar to all of you. And that was all thanks to this person who took me to this conference and, allowed me to explore and see all these other options and different things in the field.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think so many of the different mentoring programs that I'm engaged in terms of training, just by mentors inviting their mentees to come to meetings with them, to come to events out in the community with them, it expands their network of people that they come into contact with. It expands their perspective on community issues, helps them to understand the diversity of resources that are available in the community. And as Gabby just shared, just by going to a conference, all of a sudden it's like opened this new path for her to be able to advance not only the goals that she has for youth philanthropy and her own organization, but also connect with other youth across the entire country, around the world really, that are engaged in the youth philanthropy space. And that network is just so valuable. It's so critical for youth and adults in terms of their overall leadership development. So the next slide in terms of action is what I call the Facilitator Toolbox. So what I wanted to give you guys as part of this webinar is 3 specific activities that if you were to bring a group of youth and adults from your organization or your community together to work on youth philanthropy issues or community issues, these are 3 specific activities that I will say they're tried and tested. I've done them a million times in different workshops, and I really feel like they are very applicable to the idea of how do we foster a dialogue around what it will take to advance effective youth-adult relationships. The first is called Teachable Moments, and here's how it works. You just partner up, so you take a young person and partner them up with an adult, and you basically ask them to teach their partner something that they do not know. That's the only rule, right? And they have 2 minutes each to be able to teach their partner something they do not know. Now they can think of anything they want. They can think of sharing their favorite recipe, their favorite dance move. If they speak a foreign language, they can share how to say an expression in a foreign language, how to do a unique handshake. Again, the sky is the limit in terms of what they can teach. The only rule is that their partner cannot have known that information in advance or before that coming into contact. So again, they each take 2 minutes and teach each other something after. And then we debrief it by going around the room, kind of having some people share what they've learned and really talking about the power here of being able to respect the fact that youth and adults both have something to teach each other and have something to learn from one another. Oftentimes when young people come into the room, there's this sort of sense of authority, sense of power from the adult's perspective, that the adults are there to teach and the young people are there to learn. And this exercise really challenges us in our debriefs to think about the fact that young people have an immense amount to teach adults in the same way that adults have from their experiences an opportunity to teach young people. The second activity is called puzzling leadership, and this is how it works. Basically, you pair people up, or you can work in groups of 4. 2 people, if you're working in groups of 4, 2 people would be blindfolded, and 2 people would not. The blindfolded individuals would assemble a puzzle that's placed on the table in front of them outside of the puzzle board. So you take all the pieces and scatter them across the top of the table face up. And the blind cannot talk. So those who are not blindfolded are the ones that are providing the instructions. They can't touch their partners or the puzzle itself. And so they're providing instruction to those that are blind to try to piece together the puzzle one piece at a time. Typically how I like to play this one is that about halfway through, I switch the roles. So those that are blindfolded now become the instruction givers, and those that are giving instructions become those who are blindfolded. This exercise in terms of its debrief is fantastic for talking about the leadership versus followership experience. So what does it take for a leader to be effective in their communication, in their engagement, and what does it take for someone to be able to follow a leader effectively? Again, this resonates with this whole idea of giving and taking and understanding how we put ourselves in the shoes of someone else and guide them in a way that's effective for them. The third exercise is called Community Scramble. This exercise essentially is you take your whole group and you divide them into teams. So say you had 20 people, you divide them into 4 teams of 5. You give each team a blank puzzle board and a bag of puzzle pieces. And the puzzle pieces behind the scenes you've mixed up across the 4 groups. So you're getting a mixed up bag of pieces. You essentially start the exercise by saying, do whatever it takes to complete your puzzle, and say go. And essentially what happens is the teams think they've got all the pieces they need for their puzzle. They go to work trying to piece it together. They start to realize that they don't, and they start to really struggle with what they do to solve the problem. Well, then they realize they need to go across the groups and start to share the puzzle pieces, ultimately to be able to complete the overall puzzle board at the end of the day, which is the ultimate goal. And so this exercise, what I love in the debrief is it really starts to talk about vision and understanding the ultimate purpose or the why around the work that we're doing. So why are we bringing young people and adults together to work at the same table? It also plays to individual strengths. So you'll start to see roles emerge in each of the teams around people who are so focused on putting that puzzle together while other people are out negotiating for pieces and other people are sort of hands-off and laid back and sort of along the sidelines, right? And so cheering people on, motivating people to get what is needed. In the process of debriefing this particular exercise, we talk a lot about the stages of group development. So the forming, storming, norming, and performing that all youth-adult partnerships are going to go through when they start working together. I particularly, in the debrief, like to focus in on the storming stage and talk about one of the key reasons why groups get stuck in the storming stage is because of a lack of a trust for one another. And so when we build trust with each other by building relationships that have a solid foundation of understanding and respecting each other, we really can make sure that at the end of the day that foundation will move the group to a point to move from storming to norming. Processes are put in place where everybody's roles are clear and people respect the overall procedures that may guide that group from moving from point A to point B. In terms of the question that's up, how big of a puzzle is the Community Scramble and how long for this? Community Scramble, I just use a 24-piece puzzle for each of the groups, and typically this exercise can be done in about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how long you want to debrief it. You can also put a time frame on it, so you can start the exercise and say you need to complete the task within the next 5 minutes or within the next 10 minutes. Usually groups accomplish it within about 5 to 8 minutes or so, depending on the age group in the room. So our next slide is going to take us to our final element of today's webinar, which is really about we've got the right mindset to be able to build, manage, and sustain youth-adult partnerships. We talk about being able to move that mindset to action, and the final stage is really at the end of the day, how do we know we're being effective? And so what you see on the screen here is essentially 6 core elements of effective evaluation that I've used in the programming and the work that I've been doing. The first is all around tying things back to the ultimate vision, or the answering the question why. So it's aligning to the ultimate goals of the organization, the values, and the capacity. So when you bring youth and adults together and you start to foster these relationships, It's taking a step back and asking ourselves, what are we hoping to achieve? What are the values that are going to help guide these partnerships as they move forward? And what capacity is needed to ensure their success? When we do that, we couple it with research-based effective practices. For today's example, I would share the Youth Adult Partnership Rubric from the University of Michigan. This is a great example of 4 core areas to think about how are we deploying these in the work that we're advancing around youth adult partnerships. We move from there to prioritizing the data. Look, we can evaluate a million things, right? But we have to go back to the question of why are we doing this? What's the ultimate purpose? What are we aiming to achieve? And what are the core set of data that's going to help us to determine if we're achieving that particular goal? In the prioritization of data, we may want to think about it as well in terms of short-term and long-term. For some programs I work with in the short term, we look specifically at engagement in terms of that continuum of engagement, where people came in and where they are over time. So how are we moving people from their point of entry up the continuum of engagement closer to our ideal state? In a longer term, we look at the impact on the young people, the adults that are at the table, and the community more broadly. The data collection, we look at a couple different forms. So I found 3 that have been most successful. So interviewing youth and adults individually, one-on-one, doing surveys, and then focus groups with a mixed group of youth and adults, or a separate focus group for youth and a separate group for adults, to really understand how we get both the quantitative data that we need to measure our progress, but also to hear some of that anecdotal qualitative data to really understand what people are feeling and what people are experiencing in the process of advancing these youth adult partnerships. We take all of that data that we've collected and we start to identify the trends. We start to identify where the strengths of the partnership are right now. We also begin to identify where the breakdown points are, where the areas of weakness or opportunity are that we need to maybe invest more in and really work at trying to advance. What I found in my work is a lot of times youth adult partnerships will start off very focused on building the relationship. And once the projects start to kick into gear, the focus on relationship building drifts off, and all of a sudden it becomes very business-oriented, focused towards the project outcomes. And what I would suggest in those cases is when the data starts to show that shift, you need to bring things back into balance, because the relationship building process, again, is the glue. The effective communications between youth and adults throughout the entire programming or planning process is what's going to set you up for success with whatever it is that you're advancing. The last is, I think, also an anchor part of the evaluation that often gets left off, and this is the impact reporting. And this is not just a report to a board of directors, but this is really about how do we communicate the findings of our evaluation to the youth, to the adults. So how do we help them to understand what the data is telling us, engage in a conversation about how we take that data and do something with it in terms of identifying specific next steps, specific action items to foster even stronger partnerships moving forward, and how do we advance a really solid state of transparency. So we're not afraid of the data, but we embrace the data as a real learning opportunity and create that culture within our organization that helps us to continually learn and grow. So with that, I want to conclude with an analogy that I was introduced to by Sir Ken Robinson, who's an education reformer who's spoken around the world. He's received millions of views on his TED Talk around education reform. And he uses this analogy of Death Valley and saying, when we think of Death Valley, this is what we think of, because this is what 99% of the time it looks like. And what he says is in the fall of 2004, Death Valley looked just like this. The only difference was that there was an immense amount of rain that fall. So that when the spring of 2005 came along, if you flip to the next slide, Death Valley transformed into this, which is just mind-boggling when you think about what it looks like 99% of the time. He used this as an analogy to say that Death Valley isn't dead, but it's dormant. And right beneath that surface are these seeds of possibility waiting for the right conditions to come about. He talks about the real role of leadership is not about command and control. It's not about an adult telling a young person what to do or a youth telling an adult what to do. But the real role of leadership is about climate control. It's about collectively creating a climate of possibility. That climate of possibility is where youth and adults can excel using their strengths, using their talents, and leveraging their experiences to advance both their own development, learning and growth, as well as the projects, the programs, the change that they wish to see within their communities and within their organizations. So with that, we have about a little less than 10 minutes left. I want to open it up for Q&A and just start by saying thank you to everybody who's on today's webinar or who's tuning in. And a huge thank you to Gabby, Lexi, and Ali for joining me today and sharing some of their experiences as part of our discussion.
Thanks, Dan. We'll just go now to questions, so I'll encourage participants, if you have questions for Dan, Gabby, or Lexi, please just put them right into the question box. It's right on the bottom of your control panel. And I'd like to start with a question for Lexi and Ali, or Lexi and Gabby, I'm sorry. You're still young, so how young were you when you first got involved in philanthropy? Like, at what age did you start, and what were you doing when you started? And maybe Gabby, if you'll start first, if you'll answer first.
So for me, growing up, I've always been involved with giving back to the community and volunteering. And I think I really started with philanthropy when I was in middle school. And it's where I kind of really understood the concept and, the really impact of, what we're doing and what it actually means to give back and help people. And from there, I kind of just evolved, and I first really started on a board or really learned something was when I was at Sleepaway Camp. And we had the opportunity to be on a board, and we learned about different organizations. And this kind of was the first board, my first eye-opener. And after that, it's just kind of kept on going. And I caught the bug of philanthropy, and it just happened.
That philanthropy bug. Lexi, how about you?
Okay, so for me, going into high school, my freshman year, I knew I wanted to get involved, but I didn't necessarily know how. So I think it was when the summer of my sophomore year, I got invited to be in my community foundation. We have a thing called a Youth Advisory Council. So, and we call it a YAC. So basically what we're doing is it's a group of youth throughout our community that are given the power to vote on grants that come in based on the project has to be youth engaging. So we get to vote and place our ideas and basically just get to fund projects within our community. So that was when I first got wow, I actually have a voice, I can actually do this. And then from there on, I'd say maybe so it's been 3 years. I've just been trying to get more and more involved with anything that is youth driven. So, yep.
Thank you. It doesn't look like we don't have any questions that have come in so far. So I guess I just want to ask you all, do you have any takeaways, anything that you think everyone should walk away today knowing or understanding? And Dan, do you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. So, I think the number one takeaway that I would put out there for building a youth-adult partnership that's effective is that it takes time. And I think that through my experience working with a wide variety of organizations, whether they're nonprofit organizations or foundations or city agencies that are engaging youth in decision-making, I think oftentimes people start the partnership very focused on the project outcome. And so my advice to those listening would be to really take time up front to build the relationships between the youth and adults, because through that process you establish a sense of respect, a sense of trust, a sense of openness, and that creates the atmosphere for which you can take whatever project you want to tackle. You can take it from point A to point B, and you're likely to achieve an outcome that is far beyond what you initially thought it would be, because that relationship is so key.
Right. Thanks, Dan. And then we have a question that came in next for Lexi. How were you approached by the Community Foundation to get involved? How'd you learn about it? How'd you get plugged in? And then also if you can just go right into what your takeaway would be for everyone. So 2 questions for Lexi.
Okay, so first question. How I got involved was through our community foundation. We so within my high school, we open it up to anyone within our community, but through my high school, we kind of select people that we think would not only want to get involved with the grant making but also with volunteering and sticking through and being on the committee and going to the meetings and stuff like that. So I was actually nominated by someone who was already on the committee. So that's kind of just how I got involved. But there are people within my school that know of it and can refer it. So if a student wanted to get involved, they could go to their counselor and say, hey, I want to get involved. What should I do? Because ours isn't necessarily a school thing. It's more of a community-based organization. What was the second question again?
The second question was just, do you have any takeaways for everyone? Anything you want people to walk away knowing?
I think what Dan said was a great takeaway, just especially from my personal experiences with having adults approach me. I think it's definitely important for people to realize that you can't just automatically build a relationship. It's more of like you have to find something that you have in common and then build off of that, and then you can develop projects and stuff like that.
All right, thank you. Gabby, do you have any final thoughts or just a takeaway for us today? And no pressure if not. I just wanted to check it with you.
So my kind of takeaway is that what you guys are doing, wanting to involve, the youth in philanthropy, it's not an easy process, and there's going to be programs that are successful and some that are not successful. But know that in the end, you are impacting the youth's lives, and you are making better future leaders and philanthropists. And for me, if it hadn't been for adults who held these programs and, tried to involve the youth, I wouldn't be where I am today. So it's kind of a two-parter as thank you for listening. Thank you, for trying to reach out to the youth and getting us involved. And it's worth it. It's 100% worth it in the long run.
All right, thank you. We don't have time for more questions right now, but we will, if you submitted a question and we didn't get to it, we'll follow up with an answer. And you see Dan's contact information as well as Catherine's. So if you have additional questions, you can reach out to one of them. And now just to quickly wrap up, we have 3 upcoming programs in the series, so please save the date for all 3 in June, August, and October. We hope that you'll be able to join us for one of those. As with this one, they're all available at no fee. So please save the dates for those and register and join us again. We also want to remind you that Exponent Philanthropy has an upcoming national conference. We'll be in Chicago this year, September 26th through the 28th. We invite you to share philanthropy lessons and join the conversation. We've been hosting those on Twitter using the hashtag MyPhilLesson, as well as on our website, myphilanthropylesson.com or .org. So please share your lesson there. And just stay connected with us on social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Here's the contact information for where you can find us on each site. I will also be sharing these slides, so you'll have all this at your fingertips as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. When you exit the webinar, you'll get a survey. Please give your feedback. We'd love to hear how you think everything went, or if you have additional questions or thoughts, we want to hear them. So please share them there, and have a good day. Bye.